how branching narratives work, and how to write them. Branching narratives are like trees, where major decisions take the story down different pathways, potentially towards a myriad of unique endings. It's like the timelines in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where one decision, one event, splits reality and sends that new timeline spiraling off in a different direction. This type of structure can become complex very quickly. Too many decisions may lead to potentially too many endings, many of which may not deliver a satisfying resolution to the overall story. And all of them need to be written, even if many of them are never seen. Fewer decisions results in less endings, which can be thematically more relevant and satisfying overall, but can create frustration due to lack of agency. The problem of, I wouldn't pick any of these options. Centering the audience or player in the experience will help balance these extremes. Too few decisions and the player feels sidelined. Too many decisions and they feel overwhelmed. A good place to start is by examining the beginning of your story and deciding on 3 to 5 solid resolutions for the arc of that protagonist or player. Imagine the best and worst case scenarios and the decisions that might lead to them. You can then chart out a golden path, the story you would like the majority of your players to experience, and use that as the basis that everything then diverges from. This is the same as planning out a novel or a screenplay, but as you do, make a note of where all the major decisions occur. For now, you just need to settle on your golden path option and move on. But later, you will revisit these decisions and come up with other options and potential paths. It's probably worth taking a moment here to highlight the difference between major decisions and minor choices in interactive storytelling. Major decisions in branched narratives can be seen as the points where the experience takes a fundamentally different path, the consequences of which should be clear and lasting. Do you spare Gollum's life or not? Do you throw the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom? Or keep its power for yourself? Minor choices, more about the moment and flavour. They allow for self-expression on the part of the player. They have immediate consequences, but overall do not change the bigger picture too much. To borrow from Tolkien again, do you offer Gandalf or Galadriel the One Ring? Or not? Either way, they will refuse it, but by offering it, you learn more about both of them and the ring itself. In a similar fashion to doing the cards for screenplays, you can do the same for your golden path, before then adding more cards and links to the various alternate paths that split out from the major decisions. You can think of this as growing and training your tree, like you would a bonsai. But this is where our tree analogy fails us somewhat, as it is also important to remember that paths can also reconnect with the main body and to each other. This is where gates come in. These are major plot events, relevant to the overall progression and tone of a story, that for the entire experience to work, need to occur, or at the very least be touched upon. Picture it as gathering all or some of the various branches together to train your tree to grow in a particular direction before letting it develop freely again. A branching narrative may have several such gates, which often coincide with the beats of 3-act structure, and are a good way to handle the major twists and turns, the necessary set pieces of the plot. They're especially useful for making the emotional journey of the player or character work, as they can be used to control the ebb and flow of the emotional beats required to make for a compelling story. Writing branching narratives is all about finding the sweet spot between decisions, choice, and resolution of the story. But how do you actually write branching narratives? What format should they take? Choose Your Own Adventure and fighting fantasy style books are one of the best and simplest examples. These books are split into a couple of hundred or so sections, each of which are numbered. In the case of fighting fantasy books, Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone settled on about 400 sections as a good length for an adventure. At the end of each section, there's usually a choice to be made. That also informs you what section to turn to next. It is relatively easy to map out the sections of these books by doing the cards as flowcharts, or even in spreadsheets, before writing them up as you would a novel, just one with many chapters. There are also various open source tools available for writing interactive stories online, such as Twine and Ink. Twine allows you to easily build Choose Your Own Adventure and fighting fantasy style branching narratives that can be played on most browsers. It works on Windows, Mac, and Linux, or you can even create and edit stories within a browser. What's more, visually, it looks like you're doing the cards. Each scene or section of your story is represented by a passage that can be linked to others, and those connections and the direction of them are shown by arrows. Twine also allows you to tag elements and track variables across your entire story, enabling you to handle more complex interactions in a passage, such as if and else statements. For example, you can see if a character has a key to the locked door and get different feedback within a passage based on that. Ink by Inkle Studios is another fantastic open source tool The emphasis again is on writing on the text itself, with the markup and code being inserted around that. It is less visual than Twine in terms of seeing the structure of your story, but it's arguably more powerful in some respects with the right planning. For this exercise, you're going to create your own branching narrative. Take a story idea you're working on, which can be a short piece or longer work. First, let's look at the overall beats of your story, your 3 acts, the breaks between them, and your midpoint. We'll then plot these out to create our golden path. Once you're happy, let's look at the ending. Can you come up with a few alternatives? If the golden path is a successful and upbeat ending, what does the opposite of that look like? What does success, but at some cost, look like? And what does failure, but with some gain, look like? If your story is being seen through the eyes of a character that the player becomes or is guiding, one way to look at these endings is to explore that character's wants and needs. Did they meet both of them? Just one? Or neither? Now, working back through the beats of your story, let's see what needs to change or flip to reach these new endings. What is emotionally satisfying as a journey? For example, midpoints are usually the emotional opposite of endings, so an upbeat ending needs a downbeat midpoint. Now we can look at the major decisions that will branch off from the golden path towards these different beats and endings. You want to make these tough decisions, ideally hard choices with no right or wrong answer. You may find some beats are reused on your paths towards the different endings, and these can become your gates. In addition, you may want to introduce decisions that allow the player to move back onto your golden path once they've gained an inkling of where they're heading. All of this can be done physically, with index cards, or you might want to explore this using Twine to lay out these major beats and paths before then writing your story. At the end of all of this, you've constructed your own tree, your own structure, which you can use as the basis for writing a branching narrative.